So before we dive into all of the really good nitty gritty here for classes and objects, I thought we would just do a little side sortie and talk really briefly about something you've already seen, but maybe kind of the rationale for it was obscured from you, is primitive variables versus objects. I do not know what page number this is for you. Let's find out, shall we? This is on page 360, or thereabouts, because I had to use an old copy of the text for this. We are accustomed now, I think, to making primitive variable declarations, right? So like we see right here, int whole number, that's a variable declaration, no problem. And while we've been going through, we've kind of been sprinkling in object declarations this whole while, and we've talked about them, but I think now's a good time to go back and just review what's happening here. Here, for a random number, let me just change the color here, and we'll talk about what's happening. We are declaring a new random variable called rand, and it's going to equal, so we are going to assign to that new random number called rand a new random number. And the reason I know that this portion of my declaration is an object declaration is because right there we have the parentheses, those open parens. Just like we saw in chapter 5, when we had those open parens, what we were doing was calling to a method, right? So that's exactly what this is doing. So let's just kind of walk this back, and we'll do this particular example in order, because really that's not the way the compile and the runtime environment sees this. So here, when we get to this line, what happens is the right-hand side of the operand has to go first. So what we do is we make a call to create a new random number object. And that random number object, the resultant, is going to be stored back here in a new random number object called rand. So I know that kind of stinks. It's actually the reason I've been ignoring coming back to talk about this whole while, because it seems strange, I guess, is the best word I have for it. So why here, if I can just call a new integer variable whole number and be done with it, why do I have to have all of this additional gobbledygook that's happening over here? Well, because an integer is a primitive data type. It comes as part of the stock understanding of what Java is. A random number, on the other hand, that's a little bit more complicated. So what happens there with the random number is we have to make a call to a class called random. And it's actually one of those things that we have to include. So remember, we would include random as our java.util.random at the very start of our main.java. So what we're doing here, and I know this is a long way around the block for this, but I promise it may or may not help, is this is an object that we are creating, an object that we are calling rand, and an object that we'll be able to do something with later on. So if you think about writing and reading files, so when we had the print writer object, we would have to have print writer and then the parentheses there. That is a call to a class that exists in an object someplace. So we've seen it a couple of times. If we kind of scroll down a little bit here, your copy of the book, the 7th edition, not the 6th edition, actually does you a little bit of a favor, and it includes the print writer and a couple of other objects that you've been calling. So there is that slight difference there, but it's something that you've been playing with off and on all this while.